The air tasted like dust and broken dreams in the ruins of Starfall Sanctuary. I'd gotten used to both. 5 years hiding in the crumbling remains of what used to be home does that to a person. I pressed my back against the cool stone wall, counting heartbeats while the patrol passed below. 23, 24, 25. Their footsteps faded, and I breathed again. Funny how you can miss something as simple as taking a full breath. The silver collar around my throat made sure of that, a permanent reminder of what I'd lost. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, feeling the runes etched into its surface. Magic suppressors. Couldn't have the last eclipse channeling starlight, now could we? The morning sun cut through gaps in the collapsed ceiling. Dust motes danced in the beams, the closest thing to stars I'd seen in years. My family used to pull light from actual stars, bend it into shields and healing magic, and 1,000 other miracles. Now I couldn't even light a candle with what remained of my power. I gathered my meager belongings, a torn blanket, half-empty canteen, and a small knife that had seen better days. Time to move. Never stay in one place too long. First rule of surviving when everyone thinks your bloodline deserved extinction. The Great Purge hadn't been quick or merciful. They'd rounded up anyone with Eclipse blood, cousins, distant relatives, even those who'd married in. Public executions broadcast across the territories as a warning. I survived by pure dumb luck, away gathering herbs when they came for my parents. 17 members of my family, gone in a single day. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday noon. I climbed down from my hideout, muscles protesting after hours of stillness. The dead zone stretched out before me, acres of blackened earth where magic had been burned away. Nothing grew here anymore. Nothing lived. Perfect place for someone like me. I'd gotten good at finding the edges where reality thinned, where I could slip between territories unnoticed. The supernatural folks didn't want me, and humans would turn me in for the bounty. 5,000 gold pieces for the last eclipse. Sometimes I wondered if I was worth that much. Austin certainly hadn't thought so. The memory still burned, even after 5 years. My mate, or so I'd thought, standing before the Apex Coalition Council, publicly severing our bond. I cannot be associated with corrupt blood, he'd said, voice carrying through the chamber. I hereby renounce all ties to Riley Manning and the Eclipse Line. The magical backlash had knocked me to my knees. Bond breaking isn't supposed to be one-sided. Supposed to be impossible, actually. But Austin had powerful friends and more powerful ambition. I shook off the memory. No use dwelling on things you can't change. The abandoned market district provided decent scavenging. Folks had fled in a hurry when the void started spreading. Left behind clothes, preserved food, sometimes medicine if you knew where to look. I ducked through a collapsed doorway, alert for signs of other scavengers. Competition got fiercer every month as the darkness claimed more territory. The void. Nobody knew where it came from, this creeping black nothingness that consumed everything it touched. Started small, just patches of emptiness that appeared overnight. Now it covered nearly a third of the supernatural territories, growing faster each year. Couldn't be coincidence it showed up right after the purge, after they'd killed everyone who might have understood what it was. I felt it sometimes, a phantom pain where my connection to the stars used to be. That same emptiness, that same hungry nothing, like looking into a mirror and seeing the void staring back. A tin of preserved peaches sat on a dusty shelf, overlooked by previous scavengers. My mouth watered at the sight. Real fruit. Been weeks since I'd tasted anything sweet. I slipped it into my pack alongside a coil of wire and half-burned candle. There's movement in the east sector, a voice called from outside. Enforcers. I froze, pulse hammering against the silver collar. I backed away from the windows, searching for an exit. The rear door was blocked by debris. Only way out was a narrow gap where the ceiling had partially collapsed. I squeezed through, ignoring the splinters that caught on my clothes and skin. The alley behind the shop led to an old temple, one of the few buildings still mostly intact. Its stone walls might provide better cover than the flimsy wooden structures surrounding it. I darted across the open space, keeping low. The temple had been dedicated to the moon goddess, sister to the stars my family once channeled. Ironic. I'd spent my childhood learning that all celestial bodies were connected. part of one great tapestry. Now I hid in the shadows of a moon temple while enforcers hunted me for the crime of being born under the wrong stars. I climbed to the second level, finding a spot behind a fallen column that offered both concealment and a view of the entrance. If they came in, I'd have warning, maybe even a chance to escape through the collapsed section of the roof. My family's power had been feared, not because we were dangerous, but because we couldn't be controlled. Star magic doesn't answer to earthly authorities. It follows older laws, deeper connections. We healed. We protected. We illuminated darkness. And they killed us for it. Now star channeling was just another legend, a cautionary tale told to mage children. Don't reach too far or you'll end up like the Eclipse family. Boots on stone. I held my breath. Not just one or two enforcers, a full squad moving with military precision. They'd surrounded the temple. Clear the lower level, a deep voice commanded. Check for hidden passages. She's here somewhere. They knew. Not just random patrol, they were looking specifically for me. I pressed myself flatter against the floor, mind racing through escape routes that no longer existed. Footsteps on the stairs now, heavy armor clanking against stone. The Apex Coalition didn't send armored squads for simple scavengers. This was an extraction team. I slid my knife from its sheath. Wouldn't do much against their armor, but might create an opening. Better to go down fighting than let them parade me through the streets before a public execution. A tall figure appeared at the top of the stairs, helmet tucked under one arm, dark skin, close-cropped hair with gray at the temples, and a jagged scar crossing his face from forehead to jaw. Captain's insignia on his shoulder. His amber eyes scanned the room, stopping exactly where I hid. "We know you're there, Riley Manning," he said, voice matter of fact. "There's no need to make this difficult." I stayed silent. Maybe he was bluffing. He sighed. "I'm Captain Adam Barton, Apex Enforcement Division. We've been tracking you for 3 weeks. "Congratulations," I finally replied, not moving from my hiding spot. "Want a medal for finding the last eclipse? Or just the bounty?" His expression didn't change. "Neither. If we wanted you dead, we wouldn't have announced ourselves." That gave me pause. Public executions were always preceded by a formal reading of crimes. Maybe they wanted that spectacle. "Show yourself," he said. "You have my word no harm will come to you if you cooperate." "The word of an Apex enforcer," I said bitterly, "worth about as much as this dust." His men had finished climbing the stairs, forming a semicircle behind their captain. 6 of them, all armed, all armored. No way out. I stood slowly, knife held loose at my side. No point pretending anymore. Captain Barton studied me, gaze lingering on the silver collar. Something like recognition flickered across his face. "Riley Manning," he said formally. "By order of Supreme Alpha Holland, you are being taken into protective custody." I almost laughed. Protective custody? That what they're calling execution these days. "We're not here to execute you." The captain's voice remained steady. "The Supreme Alpha needs you." The journey to the Coalition's fortress took 3 days. 3 days of being watched by soldiers who looked at me like I might explode or vanish. 3 days of Captain Barton's even voice explaining how the world had changed while I'd been scraping by in the ruins. The void had been small problems at first, little pockets of nothing that people avoided. Now entire towns disappeared overnight, leaving nothing but empty space that made your eyes water to look at it. Supreme Alpha Holland united the territories after the last big expansion, Barton told me as our transport rumbled across what used to be the neutral zone. Brought together 17 different factions under Coalition rule. 17. Same number as my dead family members. Funny how numbers stick with you. "And what's he like, your Supreme Alpha?" I asked, watching the landscape change from dead wasteland to orderly farmland with armed checkpoints. Barton's face went careful. "Effective." That told me plenty. The fortress rose from the horizon like something out of a nightmare, all black obsidian and sharp angles, swallowing the sunlight instead of reflecting it. Guards with silver emblems stood at attention as our transport passed through 3 separate checkpoints. I felt the weight of eyes tracking my every movement. "Home sweet home," I muttered. Captain Barton didn't smile. "For now." They gave me 15 minutes in a sterile room with running water. First real shower in years. The water ran gray, then clear. They'd left fresh clothes, plain black pants and tunic with no insignia. Better than my rags, but the message was clear. I wasn't one of them. When Barton came to collect me, he had 2 more guards with him. He's waiting. The throne room wasn't what I expected. No gold, no fancy trappings. Just a massive space carved from the same black stone as the rest of the fortress, with narrow windows letting in thin blades of light that cut across the floor like silver knives. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a simple chair of polished obsidian, and on it sat Wyatt Holland. Pictures didn't do him justice. Not that I'd seen many, just propaganda posters in abandoned buildings. He was bigger than I expected, shoulders filling out his formal black uniform like he'd been born to wear it. Silver embroidery at his collar caught the light when he moved. But it was his eyes that hit me hardest, pure silver, like liquid metal, taking in every detail of me without giving away a single thought. I'd faced down enforcers, survived ambushes, killed when I had to. But standing before Wyatt Holland made my spine want to curl. Power rolled off him in waves, not just physical, but something deeper, more primal. The kind of authority that made every instinct scream submit. I straightened my back instead. "Riley Manning," he said, his voice deep enough to feel in my chest, not a question. "Last survivor of the Eclipse bloodline." "Last one you know about," I replied, the words coming out before I could think better of them. His expression didn't change, but something in the air tightened. "Captain Barton says you're uncooperative." "Captain Barton dragged me out of my home at gunpoint." "Your home was a collapsing ruin," Wyatt said, standing. He moved like a predator, all controlled power. "And you're here because the coalition requires your abilities." "My abilities." I touched the collar at my throat. Funny thing to want from someone you've been suppressing for 5 years. He descended the 3 steps from his throne, each footfall echoing in the cavernous space. "The collar was a precaution. Your family's magic was unstable, unpredictable." "My family's magic saved lives," I snapped, "before you people decided we were too dangerous to live." "The Great Purge was before my time," he said, stopping 10 feet from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "I'm interested in the future, not the past. The void is consuming my territories. Your celestial magic is the only force that's ever pushed it back." I laughed, the sound harsh against the stone walls. "Then you're out of luck. My magic died with my family. This collar's just decoration at this point." His jaw tightened. "Our reports indicate otherwise. The resonance patterns around Starfall Sanctuary suggest dormant abilities, not absent ones." "Your reports are wrong," I held his silver gaze. "But even if they weren't, why would I help the people who murdered my entire family?" "Because the alternative is watching everything die." He closed the distance between us, looming over me. "The void doesn't discriminate, Riley Manning. It consumes everything, guilty and innocent alike." "And you care so much about innocence," I said, feeling reckless heat rise in my chest. "Tell me, Supreme Alpha, how many families have you torn apart building your empire? How many bloodlines ended under your rule?" His eyes narrowed. "Careful. Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead." I spread my arms. "But know this, my family's power is gone, and you built your throne on their graves. Good luck fighting the void with their ghosts." Something dangerous flashed across his face. The guards behind me shifted nervously. Captain Barton's hand moved subtly toward his weapon. Wyatt took another step toward me, fury rolling off him in waves. "You will help us, or—" It happened between one heartbeat and the next. One moment he was looming over me, all cold fury and authority, and the next, a spark ignited between us, bright as starfire. It started in my chest, a sudden heat that raced through my veins like molten silver, electric and undeniable. My knees almost buckled from the force of it. Mate bond. The recognition hit us both at the same time. I saw it in the widening of his silver eyes, felt it in the sudden tension that froze him mid-step. The cosmic joke of it might have made me laugh if I could breathe. 5 years running, only to be caught and bound to the very power that had destroyed everything I loved. The bond pulsed between us, insistent and ancient, a connection that bypassed reason and choice. It blazed with possibility, with promise, everything a mate bond should be. But all I felt was horror crawling up my throat. Not again. Not another alpha who saw me as nothing but a tool. Wyatt's expression shifted like quicksilver, fury to shock to something colder and more calculated. His eyes never left mine as the bond settled into place, a chain stronger than the silver around my neck. "Well," he said finally, his voice rough, "this complicates things. You will serve the Empire regardless." Wyatt Holland's words cut through me like a blade, his silver eyes hardening. "Your magic will stop the void. Your duty to these lands supersedes any biological response." I laughed then, a bitter sound that scraped my throat raw. "Of course it does." His eyebrows pulled together. "You find this amusing?" "Not amusing, familiar." I raised my chin, meeting his gaze square on. Another man putting duty before destiny. Another powerful man seeing me as a tool instead of a person. A flash of something, irritation, guilt, crossed his face before his expression settled back into that cold mask. "Captain Barton will escort you to the mage quarters. Court Mage Harris has prepared for your arrival." Just like that. Acknowledged our bond and tossed it aside in the same breath. Austin Singh had done the same 5 years ago, standing before his clan and renouncing our engagement. "The Eclipse bloodline is too unstable," he'd announced to the crowd. "I cannot risk our future on a volatile mate." Now here I was again, different man, same story. I didn't fight when the guards flanked me. What was the point? 5 years running had left me bone-tired, and this collar around my neck made sure I couldn't do much damage anyway. "This way," Barton murmured, his hand light but firm on my elbow. We walked down endless black stone corridors, each one colder than the last. Guards posted at every junction watched us pass, their eyes following me with that same mixture of fear and curiosity I'd grown used to. The last eclipse. The dangerous one. "The mage quarters are warded," Barton explained as we descended a spiral staircase. "It's for containment of magical energies." "And prisoners," I added flatly. He didn't deny it. The room they brought me to wasn't exactly a cell, but it wasn't far off. A narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a washroom barely big enough to turn around in. No windows. The walls glowed faintly with runes I recognized from my childhood studies. Containment wards, suppression wards, observation wards. "Great. Court Mage Harris will see you in 1 hour," Barton said, pausing at the door. He hesitated, then added, "It would be easier if you cooperated." I sat on the edge of the bed. "It would be easier if your Supreme Alpha hadn't murdered my family." Barton's face tightened. That was before his time, but not before his father's. I leaned back against the wall. The Holland pack led the coalition during the purge. 17 of my blood, dead in 1 day, and now he wants my help. The void is consuming everything. People are dying. I closed my eyes. "People have always been dying, Captain. It only matters when they're yours." He left without another word, the door sealing with a heavy click. I felt the wards immediately. The suppression in the collar intensified, pressing down on something inside me that had been dormant for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. A phantom ache, like a limb cut off years ago, suddenly sending pain signals again. When Court Mage Harris arrived, he brought a young woman with him. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, thin, with that perpetually disappointed look mages get when they've spent too many years with their noses in ancient texts. White hair, wire glasses, robes that had probably cost more than everything I'd owned in the last 5 years combined. "Riley Manning," he said, my name sounding clinical on his tongue. "I am Court Mage Jackson Harris. This is my apprentice, Sheila Willis." The apprentice nodded, clutching a leather-bound notebook. She looked younger than me, with dark hair pulled back so severely it had to hurt. "Let's be clear," Harris continued, setting a wooden case on the table. "Your cooperation is required, but not technically necessary. We have methods." "Methods," I repeated. "Sounds friendly." "The Supreme Alpha has authorized all measures necessary to activate your celestial magic." I barked out a laugh. "Good luck with that." His thin lips pressed together. "You find this amusing as well?" Perhaps you don't understand the severity of our situation. Perhaps you don't understand how my magic works. I tapped the collar. 5 years in this thing. Whatever was there is gone now. Harris waved his hand dismissively. Dormant, not gone. Magic of your caliber doesn't simply vanish. And you know so much about celestial magic, do you? I challenged. I've studied all recorded instances. He opened the case, revealing an array of instruments I didn't recognize. The Eclipse line has always been secretive about their methods, but the principles remain consistent across magical disciplines. That's where he was wrong, but I didn't bother correcting him. Let him find out the hard way. For the next 3 days, that's exactly what happened. Harris and his apprentice tried everything in their magical toolbox. They hooked me up to crystals that were supposed to amplify magical resonance. They drew blood and mixed it with various compounds. They chanted over me in ancient languages while Sheila took detailed notes. Nothing worked. I could have told them why, but they never asked. They just kept trying to force something that couldn't be forced. On the 4th day, Harris's patience wore thin. You're blocking us deliberately, he accused. Face flushed with frustration, I sat in the chair they'd strapped me to, exhausted. I'm not blocking anything. Your readings show potential, yet nothing manifests. He paced around me. It's like trying to draw venom from a wound that keeps sealing itself. That was actually not a bad analogy, but for all the wrong reasons. Maybe, I suggested, my voice raspy from thirst. You should consider that celestial magic doesn't work like other magic. Harris snorted. Magic is magic. Energy channeled through will and intent. I shook my head. Celestial magic flows through connection, not force. The stars don't respond to demands. Superstitious nonsense, he muttered, but I caught Sheila looking at me with new interest. That evening, they moved me to a different room, still warded, but connected to what appeared to be their medical wing. I could hear voices through the walls, sometimes crying, the sick and injured, I figured. Coalition casualties from whatever this void thing was. On my 6th day of captivity, Sheila came alone. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as she slipped inside. Court Mage Harris is consulting with the Supreme Alpha, she explained, setting down a tray with actual food on it. Bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything I'd had in years. I thought, you might be hungry. I eyed her suspiciously, but took the tray. What's the catch? No catch, she fidgeted with her sleeve. I've been thinking about what you said, about connection. I paused mid-bite. And? Our methods aren't working, she lowered her voice. But Harris won't consider alternatives. He believes all magic can be quantified and extracted. I swallowed my food. And you don't? I don't know, she admitted. But I've been reading the old texts about the Eclipse line. They speak of your family blessing crops, healing the sick, guiding travelers by starlight. None of it sounds like the kind of magic we're trying to force from you. Smart girl. I studied her face, trying to decide if this was some kind of trick. What do you want from me? She hesitated. There's a boy in the medical wing, Joshua. He's 8 years old, and he's dying. The void sickness. Harris has tried everything. Something stirred in my chest, a feeling I'd buried years ago. Why tell me this? Because the texts say the Eclipse line had healing gifts. Her eyes met mine, pleading. I thought maybe if you saw him. I set down my spoon. You think I can heal him when your court mage couldn't? With this collar still around my neck, I touched the cold metal band, feeling the weight of it against my skin. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. Sheila leaned forward. But what if it's not about power? What if it's about that connection you mentioned? I studied her face. Earnest, hopeful, desperate. Not the calculation I'd seen in Harris or the cold authority in Holland's eyes. Just a person trying to save a child. Show me, I said finally. She led me through a connecting door I hadn't noticed before, a guard trailing behind us at a distance. The medical wing was brighter than my quarters, with white walls instead of black stone. Beds lined both sides, most occupied by people with various injuries. Some had strange gray markings on their skin that seemed to shift when I looked directly at them. Void sickness, Sheila explained, following my gaze. It starts with the markings, then spreads inward. At the far end, curtains had been drawn around one small bed. Sheila pulled them back gently, revealing a tiny figure beneath white sheets. The boy couldn't have been more than 8, his face gaunt and his breathing shallow. The gray markings covered most of his visible skin, pulsing slightly with each labored breath. Joshua, Sheila said softly. He was found at the edge of a void zone 3 weeks ago. His entire settlement was lost. Something twisted inside me. I'd spent 5 years running, hiding, surviving, focused only on staying one step ahead of those who wanted me dead or captured. I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about anyone else. His parents? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sheila shook her head. He's alone. I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't explain. My hand reached out before I could stop it, hovering over his small fingers. The markings, I murmured. They're like absences, places where the light's been consumed. That's actually a good description, Sheila said, surprise in her voice. Harris calls them reality fractures, places where the void has begun to digest normal space. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Joshua. What happens if they spread completely? The person disappears like they never existed. Joshua's eyes fluttered open then, green eyes, bright with fever but somehow still curious. He looked at me without fear. Are you an angel? He whispered. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. No, kiddo, just a prisoner like you. His brow furrowed. I'm not a prisoner. Sure you are. We're all stuck in these beds one way or another. I touched his hand gently. It felt cold. I'm Riley. Joshua. His eyes drifted to my collar. Are you magic? Sheila says there's magic people here. I used to be, I admitted. A long time ago. He studied me with that direct way children have. What happened? I lost my family. Then I lost my stars. Then I lost myself for a while. Joshua nodded like this made perfect sense. I lost my mom and dad, and my dog, his voice caught. And now I'm losing me too. Something broke open inside me then, a dam I'd built years ago when they'd slaughtered my family and forced this collar around my neck. I'd shut everything down, turned off anything that might hurt. But this child, with his matter-of-fact acceptance of his fate, reached right past all my defenses. Can I tell you a secret, Joshua? I leaned closer, suddenly not caring about the guard or Sheila or anyone else who might be watching. He nodded, eyes wide. My family, we weren't just magic people. We were star people. We could talk to the stars, and sometimes, if we asked nicely, they'd help us. Real stars? He whispered. Real stars, I confirmed. Even when you can't see them, they're still there, you know. Behind the clouds, behind the daylight. Always watching. His hand tightened on mine. Do they watch me? Of course they do, I smiled, feeling something stir beneath my skin, a tingling I hadn't felt in 5 years. Would you like to meet them? Joshua nodded, a smile breaking across his tired face. I closed my eyes, not really expecting anything to happen. The collar was still there, the ward still active. But for the first time in years, I didn't try to force it. I didn't grasp or demand or beg. I simply remembered my grandmother teaching me to listen for the stars' music. Remembered my mother showing me how to weave their light between my fingers like thread. Remembered that celestial magic wasn't about power. It was about relationship. The stars are shy, I whispered to Joshua. But they love children. They remember when the universe was young. And then, impossibly, wonderfully, I felt it. A response. Not from inside me, but from above, beyond, outside. A gentle pressure against the barriers of the wards, like a hand pressed to a window. They're here, Joshua breathed, his eyes fixed on something above us. I looked up. A tiny point of light hovered near the ceiling, no bigger than a firefly, but unmistakably starlight, silvery blue and impossible. Sheila gasped behind me. The guard took a step forward, then froze, uncertain. The star point drifted down slowly, pulsing gently. I held out my palm, and it settled there, cool and familiar. Hello, old friend, I murmured. The light expanded slightly, sending tendrils of silver across my fingers. The collar around my neck grew warm, not painfully, but noticeably. Would you help my friend Joshua? I asked the light. He's very brave, but he's very sick. The star point bobbed once, then floated toward Joshua's chest, hovering over the worst of the gray markings. It expanded again, spreading out like spilled water, seeping into the markings wherever it touched them. Joshua giggled. It tickles. I watched in wonder as the gray receded, just a little, from the edges of each mark. Not healing him completely, one tiny star couldn't manage that, but showing what was possible. Showing that the void could be pushed back. The light dimmed gradually until it winked out entirely. I felt its departure like a physical ache. But Joshua was beaming. They do remember me, he whispered. I blinked back sudden tears. Of course they do. Sheila moved closer, examining Joshua's markings with wide eyes. They've receded at least a centimeter everywhere the light touched. How did you? I didn't do anything, I said, standing up. I just made an introduction. The guard was already speaking into his communication device, no doubt reporting what he'd witnessed. I knew what would happen next. Harris would come running, then Holland, and the demands would start again. But something had changed. The stars had answered, not because I'd been strapped to a chair and drained of blood, not because powerful men had ordered it, but because a child needed help, and I'd asked on his behalf. I looked down at Joshua, who was already drifting back to sleep, a small smile still on his face. Thank you, I whispered, not to him, but to the distant presence I could still faintly sense beyond the ceiling, beyond the sky. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't completely alone. The door banged open, and I didn't have to look to know who it was. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees whenever he entered a space. Supreme Alpha Wyatt Holland. My mate. The thought still felt like swallowing something sharp. Report, he demanded. Not to me, but to the guard, who straightened like someone had run electricity through his spine. Sir, the prisoner was brought to see the boy and manifested celestial magic despite the suppression collar. Holland's silver eyes locked on me, then on the star hovering above Joshua. His expression didn't change much. Guy had a poker face that would have made him a fortune in the old casinos, but something flickered there. Surprise, maybe. Court Mage Harris bustled in behind him, all business. Impossible, he muttered, pulling some kind of device from his pocket that glowed blue when he activated it. The collar is functioning at full capacity. I stayed put beside Joshua's bed, one hand still holding his. The kid was nervous now with all these important people crowding in, and I gave his fingers a gentle squeeze. It's just a little star, I said, keeping my voice casual like we were discussing the weather. Barely enough light to read by. Harris circled the bed, examining the star from every angle, then rounded on me. You've been deliberately obstructing our work. 6 days of failed experiments while you were capable of this all along. I snorted. Yeah, because I really enjoyed getting poked and prodded for almost a week. Then explain this. He gestured at the star. I looked at Joshua, whose color had improved in just the short time the light had been with him. I don't know. Maybe it's not about forcing anything. Maybe it's about asking. Holland stepped closer, and everyone in the room tensed except Joshua, who was still watching his star with fascination. The Supreme Alpha studied the boy's arm where the gray marks had faded. Leave us, he ordered suddenly. Harris opened his mouth to protest, but Holland silenced him with a look. One by one they filed out, Harris, Sheila, the guard, until it was just me, Holland, and Joshua. Does it hurt? Holland asked Joshua, nodding at his arm. The boy shook his head. Not anymore. It feels warm now. Before it was cold all the time. Holland pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed, and it was such an unexpected move that I just stared. The Supreme Alpha sitting at a sick kid's bedside didn't fit with everything I'd heard about him. There are 23 others with void sickness in this facility, he said, not looking at me. 347 reported cases throughout Coalition territory. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't a question. You helped this child when my court mage couldn't, he continued. Why? The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Joshua, who was drowsy now, eyelids drooping as the star continued its gentle work. Why wouldn't I help him? Holland's eyes narrowed. We imprisoned you, put a collar on you, dragged you here against your will. And your first act with even a fragment of your power is to heal a child you've never met. I shrugged. didn't have a fancy answer for him. He needed help. That's not an explanation. What do you want me to say? I felt suddenly tired. That I should have let him suffer to spite you. What kind of person would that make me? Joshua had drifted off to sleep, the stars still pulsing steadily above him. His little face was peaceful for probably the first time in weeks. An empire isn't just about territory and power, I said quietly. It's people. All these lives you're responsible for. My family understood that before the purge. They taught me that real strength is about protection, not just control. Holland was silent for so long I thought he might not respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was different somehow. Less imperial decree, more actual person. You speak of your family with pride, despite what it cost them. They died for what they believed in, I said. That's worth something, even if history won't remember it that way. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And what do you believe in, Riley Manning? The question hit me hard, maybe because nobody had asked me anything like that in 5 years. I'd been too busy surviving to think about believing. This, I said finally, nodding toward Joshua and the star. Healing what's broken, one soul at a time. It's who I am, not just what I can do. Something changed in his expression then, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. My court mage says the void cannot be healed, he said, his voice lower now, that it can only be contained or destroyed. Maybe he's asking the wrong questions. I watched the star pulse. Or asking in the wrong way. Holland stood abruptly and walked to the window. His back was to me, shoulders rigid under that formal black clothing. The void took my parents 17 years ago, he said, and the words seemed dragged out of him. They were the first. We didn't understand what was happening then, thought it was some new disease. 17, that number again. Same as the family members I'd lost. Now it's taking my sister. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room temperature. Your sister. He turned, and for the first time, I saw raw emotion on his face. Fear, the kind that eats at you from the inside. Virginia, my twin. The void markings appeared on her 3 months ago. They've spread faster than any case we've documented. She's the heir to everything I've built. His voice roughened. She's all I have left. And suddenly, everything made sense. The desperation, the ruthlessness, the reason he'd had me hunted down and brought here. Not ambition or power, but terror. The kind that comes from watching everyone you love disappear and being powerless to stop it. I looked at Joshua, peacefully sleeping under his star, then back at Holland, at Wyatt, seeing him differently now. Not the supreme alpha who'd ordered my capture, but a man watching his last family member slip away. That's why you need celestial magic, I said softly, for your sister. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The truth was written all over his face. Something shifted between us in that moment. Hard to explain it exactly. Like we'd both stepped out from behind our walls. Him the cold, calculating leader, me the defiant survivor. And seen each other as people. Two people who'd lost almost everything, hanging on to what little remained with bloodied fingernails. The mate bond hummed between us, but this was something different, deeper. A recognition that went beyond biology or magic. I can try to help her, I said, surprising myself. I can't promise anything, but I can try. For a moment, he looked younger, the weight lifting slightly. Then he nodded, just once. Not an order this time, a request. We stood on opposite sides of Joshua's bed, captor and captive no longer. Just two people united by devastating loss, trying to find their way forward in the dark. It's a strange thing, watching someone's hands at your throat when you can't decide if they mean freedom or just a different kind of prison. Wyatt stood close, too close, as his fingers worked at the clasp of my collar. Each brush of his skin against mine sent little jolts racing down my spine. Hold still, he muttered. His breath warmed my neck. Kind of hard when you're fumbling around like that. My voice came out shakier than I meant it to. I'm not fumbling. The mechanism is complex. He leaned in closer, and I could smell him. Pine and leather and something else I couldn't name. Something that made my stomach flip over. The collar had been part of me for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not have cold metal pressing against my skin. 5 years of that weight. 5 years of feeling like someone had stuffed cotton batting between me and the stars. There was a click, then another, and suddenly the pressure eased. The collar came away in his hands. I gasped as sensation flooded back. Not my magic, not yet, but the absence of suppression. Like someone had finally lifted their boot off my chest after sitting on me for years. Better? Wyatt asked, setting the collar on the table between us. We were in his private study, not the throne room where he played supreme alpha for everyone else. This room had books and maps and a big window that looked out over the mountains. Felt more human somehow. I don't know yet. I rubbed my neck, feeling the indentations where the metal had rested. Why now? He walked to a large table covered in maps. Because I need your help, and I need you at full capacity. He gestured at the papers. These are the Void incursion patterns, 23 separate outbreaks in the last 2 months. I approached cautiously, still dizzy with the new lightness around my neck. The maps showed the coalition territories, 17 former factions now under Wyatt's rule. Black ink marked the spots where the Void had appeared. There's no pattern, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I tilted my head and looked again. Wait, Wyatt glanced at me. Our eyes met, and that weird electric current zapped between us again. Mate bond, the thing neither of us had asked for or wanted. What do you see? He asked. I pointed at the marks. They follow the old ley lines, the celestial pathways my family used to monitor. My finger traced an invisible connection between 3 of the outbreaks. This isn't random. The Void is following magical channels. Wyatt leaned over the map, his shoulder nearly touching mine. I stepped back slightly, but not before feeling the heat of him. Can you stop it? He asked. Maybe. I don't know. I closed my eyes, reaching inside for that connection I'd felt with Joshua. It was there, stronger now, without the collar, but still distant. My magic's been suppressed for years. It'll take time to come back fully. Time we don't have. Wyatt's voice had that edge again, the supreme alpha voice that probably made his enforcers snap to attention. Well, excuse me for not bouncing back immediately after you people spent years hunting me, and 5 years choking my magic with that thing. I jabbed a finger at the collar. His jaw tightened. That wasn't me. No, just your father and every enforcer wearing your symbol. We stood there glaring at each other, the map forgotten between us. Then something shifted in his expression. I need your help, Riley, he said quietly. My sister is getting worse. And just like that, the anger drained out of me. Hard to stay mad at someone when they look at you with that kind of fear in their eyes. I knew what it was to lose family. I'll try, I said, but I need to understand what we're dealing with. Over the next few days, Wyatt and I fell into a routine. Each morning, we'd meet in his study. He'd bring new reports of Void sightings, and I'd try to make sense of them. Sometimes our hands would brush over the maps, and we'd both pull back like we'd been burned. Other times, I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. It was on the 4th day that I first noticed Denise Alexander. I was walking from the mage quarters to Wyatt's study when a tall blonde woman in a deep blue dress rounded the corner. She stopped dead when she saw me, her ice blue eyes narrowing to slits. So it's true, she said, her voice honey-sweet but with something sharp underneath. The Supreme Alpha has unleashed a celestial witch on us. I stiffened. And you are? Denise Alexander, council representative and the Supreme Alpha's intended. She said it with a little smile, like she was staking a claim. Intended. The word hit me harder than it should have. Of course he'd have a political match lined up. That's what alphas did. They made alliances through mating. The fact that he and I had some biological connection didn't change politics. Congratulations, I said flatly. She circled me slowly, taking in my plain clothes and the absence of my collar. I understand you've been quite the miracle worker with young Joshua. The court is simply buzzing about it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, though some are concerned about the wisdom of allowing eclipse magic within our walls, given its unstable history. And there it was, the real reason for this little chat. I'm helping your people, I said. That's all. For now, she leaned in slightly. But blood tells, doesn't it? There's a reason the coalition executed your family. I felt the stars stir inside me, responding to my sudden anger. They executed my family because they feared what they didn't understand. Or perhaps they understood all too well. She smoothed her already perfect dress. I do hope you won't get too comfortable here. The Supreme Alpha has important decisions ahead, and we wouldn't want him distracted by temporary arrangements. She glided away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my fists clenched at my sides. When I told Wyatt about the encounter later, he looked annoyed but unsurprised. Denise is politically powerful, he said. Her family controls 3 of the original factions. I can't simply dismiss her concerns. She's not concerned, I said. She's threatened. By me. Something flickered across his face. The mate bond complicates things. You think? I ran a hand through my hair. Look, I'm not here for whatever that is. I'm here to help with the void and maybe keep more kids like Joshua from getting sick. Wyatt nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a moment too long before he turned back to the maps. The next day, Sheila brought me to the medical wing, where 3 more void victims had been brought in. One was a middle-aged man with the gray markings creeping up his arms. Another was an elderly woman whose entire left side had gone ashen. The third was a teenage girl, maybe 14, with just a small patch on her cheek. I sat beside each of them in turn, reaching for that connection I'd found with Joshua. It came easier this time, like the stars remembered me. Little points of light appeared, hovering over each patient. The lights pulsed and sank into the gray marks, pushing back the void's corruption. But something was different this time. As the starlight flowed through me, I felt a draining sensation, like someone had opened a valve at the bottom of my soul. By the time I finished with the 3rd patient, my hands were shaking, and I could barely stand. "Are you all right?" Sheila asked, grabbing my arm as I swayed. "Just tired," I said, but it was more than that. I caught my reflection in a metal tray. My face was pale, and the silver streaks in my dark hair seemed more pronounced. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I studied my reflection more carefully. The change was subtle, but undeniable. Using my magic against the void was aging me. Drawing on the stars was draining my life force. I pressed my hands against the mirror. The irony wasn't lost on me. I finally had my magic back. Finally had a purpose, and using it might kill me. Save the Empire, destroy myself. Some choice. I kept the discovery to myself at first. What good would telling anyone do? They needed my magic, and I needed to feel useful after years of just surviving. But Denise noticed. I caught her watching me in the corridors, her eyes calculating as she took in my increasingly tired appearance. 3 more healing sessions left me with new silver strands in my hair and dark circles under my eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. A week after our first encounter, Denise cornered me outside the council chambers where Wyatt was meeting with his advisors. "You don't look well," she said, false concern dripping from every word. "Perhaps celestial magic is too much for you after all." "I'm fine." I moved to step around her. She blocked my path. "Wyatt is concerned about your methods. Several council members have raised questions about the safety of what you're doing. Have they? Or have you?" Her smile tightened. "We all want what's best for the coalition, for Wyatt." She placed special emphasis on his name. It would be terrible if he pinned all his hopes on someone who couldn't deliver. Or worse, someone whose magic might turn unstable, like the rest of her family's. Before I could answer, the council chamber doors opened, and Wyatt emerged with several older men and women in formal attire. His eyes found me immediately, that mate bond again, always pulling us into each other's orbit. Then he saw Denise standing there, and his expression closed off. "Denise," he acknowledged. "Riley, I didn't expect to find you both here." "I was just expressing my concern for Riley's health," Denise said, her hand coming to rest possessively on Wyatt's arm. "She looks positively drained after her healing sessions." Wyatt's gaze sharpened as he really looked at me. I could see the moment he noticed the changes, the new silver in my hair, the hollows under my eyes, the slight tremor in my hands that I couldn't quite control. "What's happening to you?" he asked quietly. Before I could answer, one of the council members, an older man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "Supreme Alpha, Perhaps this is evidence of what Representative Alexander has been warning us about. The eclipse line's instability manifesting. I watched as several others nodded in agreement. Denise's campaign against me was working. They were looking at me not as a healer, but as a threat. Just like they'd looked at my family before the executions. Denise smiled, triumph glittering in her cold blue eyes. Perhaps we should reconsider allowing an eclipse to use magic within our walls, she suggested. For everyone's safety. I felt it happening every time I called the stars. First came the rush, like diving into cold water, then the burn through my veins as the celestial light flowed out of me and into the void-scarred land. Each time, it took a little more from me than before. I wasn't stupid. I saw what was happening in the mirror, my cheeks hollowing out, the shadows under my eyes deepening to bruise purple, the silver streak in my hair spreading like frost across a window. 28 years old, and I was withering like an unwatered plant. 3 weeks after Wyatt took off my collar, I stood at the edge of a void zone with Captain Barton and 4 guards. The black nothingness stretched about 50 feet across, dead center in what used to be a village square. Stand back, I said, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. I raised both hands and reached upward with my mind, calling to the stars even though it was midday and they weren't visible. The response came slower each time, like they had to travel farther to reach me. Or maybe I was getting weaker at calling. When the first pinprick of light appeared above my fingertips, I almost cried with relief. I never knew if it would be the time they didn't answer. The light grew, spinning itself into a bright silver thread that wrapped around my hands. I guided it toward the void, whispering, "Please help, please heal." The words weren't magic, the connection was. But the words helped me focus. The thread stretched from me to the void's edge, then split into dozens of smaller filaments that crawled across the blackness, like roots seeking water. Where they touched, the void hissed and recoiled. The pain hit me then, like someone peeling off my skin one layer at a time. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, tasted copper. My knees buckled, but I stayed standing through pure stubbornness. The guards shifted nervously behind me. After 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours, the void had shrunk to half its size. The silver threads had woven themselves into the earth, creating a latticework of light that pulsed with my heartbeat. I couldn't finish it. Black spots danced in my vision. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hold them steady. "That's enough," Barton said, stepping forward. "You're bleeding." I touched my face. Blood trickled from my nose, staining my fingertips red. "I can keep going." "Not today," he said, and for once I didn't argue. The return journey to the fortress was a blur. By the time we arrived, I could barely walk straight. The guards tried to help me, but I shook them off. I wouldn't show weakness in public, not with Denise Alexander's spies watching my every move. "She's dying, you know." Denise's voice carried across the council chamber, crystal clear and dripping with fake concern. Every time she uses that magic, it drains more of her life force. I stood in the shadows outside the door, eavesdropping like some desperate teenager. Pathetic, maybe, but I needed to know what I was up against. "The Eclipse Girl has made remarkable progress against the Void," Councilman Weber replied. 3 villages recovered in 2 weeks. "At what cost?" Denise's voice took on that honeyed quality that made my skin crawl. "Supreme Alpha, surely you've noticed her deterioration. The question becomes whether sacrificing one life, even a mate's life, is acceptable to save thousands." My stomach turned to ice. She'd framed it perfectly, the noble sacrifice versus selfish preservation. Wyatt's silence stretched for several seconds. "The decision is not yours to make, Councilwoman Alexander," he finally said, his voice tight. "Of course not," Denise replied smoothly, "but as you're intended." "We have no formal arrangement," Wyatt cut in. The council does not dictate my personal affairs." I should have felt triumphant at that, but all I felt was tired. So damn tired. I slipped away before anyone could discover me lurking there like some ghost. My room felt smaller each day, like the walls were closing in. I sat cross-legged on my bed, palms up, trying to summon even the tiniest spark of starlight. Nothing came. A knock at the door startled me. Sheila entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a tray with tea and bread. "You missed dinner again," she said, setting the tray beside me. "And you look terrible." I laughed weakly. "Thanks for the honesty." She sat beside me, her apprentice robes rustling. "Court Mage Harris says you're using the magic wrong." "Court Mage Harris can go foo." "I know," she interrupted with a small smile. "But what if he's partly right? What if there's a way to channel it that doesn't drain you so badly?" I shook my head. My family's records were all destroyed in the purge. The knowledge died with them. I picked up the teacup, noticing how my hands trembled. Besides, Harris just wants the magic for himself. He doesn't care if I burn out. "And Denise Alexander is capitalizing on your weakness," Sheila said bluntly. "She's telling everyone who'll listen that you're unstable, that your deterioration proves Eclipse magic is fundamentally flawed." She's not wrong about the deterioration part. I pulled up my sleeve to show her the gray lines creeping up my forearm. Void sickness. The very thing I'd been healing in others was starting to take root in me. Sheila's eyes widened. "Does Supreme Alpha Holland know?" "No, and he's not going to." I pulled my sleeve down. I need more time to figure this out. Time wasn't on my side. 3 days later, Denise cornered me in the corridor outside the medical wing. I'd just finished healing a child with advanced void sickness, and my legs felt like wet paper. "You look dreadful," she said, her ice blue eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Though I suppose that's the price of playing with forces beyond your control." I leaned against the wall, trying to look casual rather than desperate for support. "What do you want, Denise?" "To offer you a way out." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're dying, Riley. We both know it. But you could still be remembered as a hero. The last eclipse, sacrificing herself to save the coalition. How thoughtful of you to plan my funeral." I pushed off from the wall, fighting the dizziness. "I'm not dead yet." Her perfect smile didn't reach her eyes. "No, but at this rate, you soon will be." "And what happens to the void then?" "The Supreme Alpha needs a strong partner, someone who can bear healthy heirs and maintain political alliances, not a walking corpse." Something in me snapped. 5 years on the run, collared and hunted like an animal. Weeks of being drained by healing magic. And now this pampered, calculating woman telling me my worth came down to breeding stock. "He needs someone who will stand by him because they care about him, not because of what they can gain," I said, my voice low but steady. "And you're right about one thing. I am dying, which means I have nothing left to lose." I stepped toward her, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. "Threaten me again," I whispered, "and you'll learn that even dying stars can burn." That night, Wyatt found me on the fortress roof. I sat with my back against a stone merlin, watching the stars emerge one by one. Each one a potential ally, each one a little farther from my reach. He sat beside me without speaking, close enough that I could feel his warmth, far enough that we weren't touching. After a few minutes, he handed me a small leather-bound book. "What's this?" I asked, taking it cautiously. "We found it in a hidden compartment in Starfall Sanctuary. It belonged to your grandmother." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, page after page of celestial diagrams, notes in my grandmother's elegant script. Tears blurred my vision. "Thank you," I whispered. "I should have given it to you sooner." His silver eyes reflected the starlight. "Denise convinced me it would be dangerous in your hands. And now I see the danger lies in not trusting you." He paused. "She says you're dying." I closed the book, tracing my finger over the embossed crescent moon on the cover. "Everyone dies eventually." "Riley," just my name, but weighted with so many questions. I rolled up my sleeve, showing him the gray lines. "It's the price of channeling starlight through a human body to fight the void. The void fights back." His jaw tightened. He took my arm gently, examining the markings. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything?" I asked. "Your sister is still sick. Your people are still dying. The void is still spreading. It changes everything." He released my arm, his expression unreadable. "There's a council meeting tomorrow, full attendance required. Another opportunity for Denise to suggest sacrificing me for the greater good." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Come anyway." The council chamber hummed with tension the next morning. 12 council members sat in a semicircle facing Wyatt's obsidian chair. I stood to the side, trying not to sway on my feet. Denise sat in the prime position, wearing a deep blue dress that made her look like royalty. "We face unprecedented crisis," Councilman Weber began. "The void continues to spread despite our best efforts." "Not despite all efforts," Denise interjected smoothly. "The Eclipse Girl has shown some success, though at catastrophic personal cost." She turned toward me with practiced concern. "Perhaps it would be best to explore alternatives before we lose our only celestial mage." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I kept my face neutral, though rage burned in my chest. "There is no alternative," Court Mage Harris said reluctantly. "My team has studied every possible magical approach. Only celestial magic directly counters the void." "Then perhaps," Denise suggested, "we should discuss how to maximize the benefit of Riley's remaining strength. A controlled sacrifice." "Enough." Wyatt's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. He stood, silver eyes glinting. "There will be no sacrifice, no controlled or otherwise expenditure of Riley Manning's life." Denise's perfect composure slipped for an instant. "Supreme Alpha, with all respect, sentiment cannot guide policy in times of crisis. If one life can save thousands." "It is not sentiment that guides me, Councilwoman Alexander." Wyatt stepped down from his chair and walked toward me. "It is truth. The truth that Riley Manning is not merely a tool to be used until broken." He reached me and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, I placed mine in his. His fingers were warm against my cold ones. "The truth," he continued, facing the council with our joined hands raised, "is that Riley Manning is my true mate, my equal, my empress." Gasps echoed around the chamber. Denise's face went white with shock, then red with fury. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "A political disaster. The court will never—" "The court will recognize what the stars have ordained," Wyatt said, his voice ringing with authority. "Riley Manning of the Eclipse bloodline is my mate by cosmic law. The celestial bond cannot be denied." As he spoke, something shifted between us. The connection that had sparked when we first met suddenly roared to life. Golden light spiraled up our joined arms, entwining us in brilliant threads that pulsed with shared heartbeats. I gasped as strength flooded back into me. The gray lines on my arm receded before our eyes, disappearing like mist in sunlight. "What's happening?" I whispered. Wyatt's eyes widened in wonder. "The bond is healing you." The light grew brighter, filling the chamber. Council members shielded their eyes. Denise backed away, her expression a mixture of rage and fear. When the light finally faded, I stood straight and strong for the first time in weeks. The void sickness had vanished completely. More than that, I felt whole in a way I never had before. Not just healed, but transformed. The starlight within me no longer burned. It sang. Wyatt turned to face me fully, his silver eyes reflecting golden sparks. "No longer will you bear this burden alone," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "From this day forward, we stand together, not as Supreme Alpha and Celestial Mage, but as equals, as Emperor and Empress." He dropped to one knee before me, still holding my hand. "Riley Manning of the Eclipse bloodline, I recognize you not for your power, but for your heart, for your courage, for who you are." His voice softened. "Will you accept this bond, freely and fully?" The chamber disappeared around us. In that moment, there was only Wyatt and me and the stars singing between us. For the first time in my life, someone saw me, not as a tool, not as a weapon, not as a sacrifice, but as myself. "I accept," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Not for power or position, but for partnership, for truth." As he rose and embraced me, the council chamber erupted in chaos behind us. Denise stormed out, her perfect composure shattered, but none of it mattered. The stars had chosen, and for once, so had I.